On December 24, 2007, while all of America was preparing for Christmas, something unimaginable happened in the small community of Carnation in the U.S. state of Washington. On a remote farm, between snow-covered fields and festively decorated houses, an entire family was wiped out, 6 people, including 2 small children. The perpetrators, the family's own daughter, Michelle Anderson, and her partner, Joseph McEnroe. That morning, everything still seemed peaceful. The parents, Judy and Wayne Anderson, an elderly, reclusive couple, were preparing their home for the traditional Christmas dinner. Their son Scott had announced that he was coming with his wife Erica and their 2 children, Olivia and Nathan. Only their eldest daughter Mary was ill and unable to attend. Michelle also lived on the property, but not in the main house, rather with Joseph in a trailer that stood a little way away. It was no secret that the relationship between Michelle and the rest of the family was strained. She had been considered difficult, argumentative, and dissatisfied for years. Nevertheless, her parents continued to support her, financially and emotionally, but on this Christmas Eve, something had changed. Out of frustration, anger, or jealousy, perhaps all of the above, Michelle decided that enough was enough. At around 4 p.m., she and Joseph left their trailer, armed with 2 pistols. Judy was outside wrapping presents when Joseph engaged her in conversation. At that moment, Michelle crept up behind her with her gun drawn. Wayne, who was sitting in the house, noticed the scene through the window and rushed outside. But it was too late. A fatal shot to the head ended his life. Judy was also shot just seconds later. The bodies were hastily dragged to a nearby barn. Michelle and Joseph knew they had to act quickly. Within an hour, Scott would arrive with his family, and they too would not survive the evening. At around 5 p.m., Scott's car drove up the driveway to the Andersons' farm. With him were his wife Erica, 5-year-old Olivia, and 3-year-old Nathan. They were looking forward to celebrating with their grandparents. Nothing could have prepared them for the fact that the house they knew so well had already become a crime scene. Michelle greeted the arrivals with a forced smile. She explained that her parents had gone out to run some errands. No one thought anything of it. The family entered the house. Scott and his family took their seats in the living room. The children ran around curiously. In the next second, several shots rang out. Michelle had suddenly pulled out her gun and shot her brother in the head. He was dead instantly. Erica screamed, grabbed the children, and ran away. But Michelle and Joseph were close behind her. In her panic, Erica managed to barricade herself and the children in a room. There she grabbed the phone and dialed 911. But the connection was barely established when Joseph broke down the door. The young mother begged for her children's lives, but Joseph shot her in the head. Then he destroyed the phone. The children were now alone. 5-year-old Olivia clung to her mother's motionless body. Nathan, just 3 years old, did not understand what was happening. He picked up the phone batteries and handed them to Joseph, a final innocent act that cost him his life. Joseph shot the little boy in the face. On that Christmas Eve, 3 generations of the family were wiped out. No warning, no reason, just pure hatred and blind obedience to a woman who called herself the White Crow. A victim, she claimed, who had been wrongfully cast out. But it was not rebellion. It was a cold-blooded massacre. At 5:13 p.m., Erica had dialed 911, but her call was not completed. Nevertheless, the connection was enough to alert the police. A patrol car was dispatched to the farm. Fortunately, as it turned out later. When the officers arrived shortly thereafter, they encountered Michelle Anderson, who approached them calmly and claimed that everything was fine. She even demonstratively locked the gate in front of them. Despite the obvious tension at the scene, the police were unable to force their way in. The farm remained locked for the time being, and the officers left. On December 26th, the silence was finally broken. Judy Anderson did not show up for work. Her colleague Linda was worried and drove to the remote property. When she arrived, she saw that both of the family's cars were still there. The lights were off, the house appeared empty, and yet the front door was unlocked. A pungent smell hit her as soon as she entered. When she reached the basement, she discovered several motionless bodies in the darkness. At first, she thought it was gas poisoning. As she approached one of the bodies, she saw the head wound. Then she realized the full extent of the tragedy. 4 bodies, carelessly stacked on top of each other. Linda immediately called 911 from a house phone. Within minutes, the police were on the scene, and this time they stayed. In the basement, they found Scott, his wife Erica, and their 2 children. In the barn were the bodies of the parents, Judy and Wayne. All had been executed with shots to the head. The parents lay separately. Michelle and Joseph had apparently dragged the bodies there to clean up the crime scene before their siblings arrived. In vain. The traces of horror could not be erased. At around 11 a.m. on the same day, Michelle Anderson and her boyfriend, Joseph McEnroe, returned to the property. Apparently, they believed they had covered up the traces of the crime sufficiently. But what awaited them was a full police operation, police tape around the house, and officers who immediately questioned them. During questioning, Michelle initially claimed that they had not even been in town on December 24th. They had wanted to travel to Las Vegas to get married, but had gotten lost. However, the couple could not produce any travel documents or a marriage certificate, nor were they wearing rings. Joseph became increasingly nervous. The investigators sensed that something was wrong, and when they put him under pressure, he broke down. After just a few minutes, he confessed. Crying, trembling, and with a broken voice, he explained that he had killed the family. He called himself a monster and said he could no longer live with himself. The confession came like a dam bursting. He described the crime in terrifying detail. Michelle confessed shortly afterwards, but without tears, without visible remorse. She soon followed with her own version, cool and calculating, but equally clear. They talked not only about the murders, but also about the alleged motives. Michelle said she hated her brother. Scott owed her $40,000 over the years, a sum that was demonstrably fabricated. Her parents had not supported her and had even pressured her to pay rent for her trailer. And then she said something that her boyfriend repeated several times, something that deeply shook the investigators. She had killed her little nephews because she wanted to spare them growing up in a cruel world. In reality, it was envy, wounded pride, the desire to take revenge for years of hurt, whether imagined or real. Her statements were contradictory, her emotions difficult to grasp. But one thing was obvious. Michelle had planned this crime, not in a moment of anger, but over weeks, and she had convinced her partner to follow her to the bitter end. Both were cooperative. They led investigators to the place where they had disposed of the 2 murder weapons, a river near the farm. Divers recovered the guns, and ballistics confirmed that they had been used to shoot the family. Then the reconstruction of the crime began. On December 24th, around 4 p.m., the couple armed themselves with pistols and waited for the moment when their parents were alone, separated from the rest of the family. Wayne was shot first. Then Judy was killed with 3 shots. The bodies were dragged into the barn. Just an hour later, Scott arrived with his wife and 2 small children. Michelle lied that her parents were out running last-minute errands. When the family gathered in the living room, she opened fire. Scott was executed in cold blood. Erica ran away with Olivia and Nathan, but she didn't stand a chance. In a lockable room, she grabbed the phone, but Joseph was faster. Erica, Olivia, and Nathan were shot one after the other with shocking coldness. After the brutal crime, Michelle and Joseph tried to cover their tracks. They cleaned the house as best they could, hid Judy and Wayne's bodies in the barn, and carelessly stacked the bodies of Scott, Erica, and the children on top of each other in the basement. It was a macabre attempt to maintain control over the chaos they had created. But time was working against them. When Michelle and Joseph returned to the farm on the morning of December 26th, supposedly to start the day as normal, they were met by the police. The trial of Michelle Anderson and Joseph McEnroe became one of the most sensational criminal cases in the history of Washington state. It was not just about a six-fold murder within a family, but also about the motive, which seemed as banal as it was cruel. Wounded pride, family tensions, a mixture of envy, disappointment, and cold calculation. The prosecution presented detailed evidence of how Michelle had built up a grudge against her family over many years. She felt like an outsider, unloved and disadvantaged. Joseph, who was described as quiet, submissive, and mentally unstable, followed her unconditionally. Together, they planned to wipe out their family. On Christmas Day, one of the most symbolic and peaceful days of the year. During the trial, Michelle appeared uninvolved for long stretches. She occasionally cast mocking glances at the audience, seemingly unaware of the gravity of her actions or unwilling to face it. Joseph, on the other hand, cried often. He repeatedly apologized to the relatives, asked for forgiveness, and said he lived every day with what he had done. Despite his remorse, the verdict was clear. McEnroe was found guilty on all 6 counts of first-degree murder. In 2015, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In Michelle Anderson's trial, the jury also found her guilty on all counts. She, too, was sentenced to life in prison. The family wiped out by this murder consisted of loving, kind people. Wayne and Judy Anderson were considered generous, helpful parents. Scott was a responsible husband and father. Erica, a warm-hearted and dedicated mother. The young children, Olivia and Nathan, were cheerful, curious, and full of joie de vivre. Their future brutally extinguished before it could really begin. Today, a memorial stone commemorates the victims of the Carnation Massacre. It stands not far from the farm where the murders took place. Friends, neighbors, and relatives gather there every year at Christmas to lay flowers and fill the silence of the snow-covered landscape with a quiet promise that they will never forget.